All right, we are live. Good evening, everybody. I hope that everybody's having a great day so far. It has been a beautiful day. I was able to get out and get around, but I spent the first half of my day trapped inside the DMV. If you have ever gone to the DMV on the next to the last day of the month or anywhere in that area, you know you must take your breakfast, you must take your lunch, and you better take a snack and a couple bottles of water and a chair. And even though it's cool outside and the weather is nice, take an umbrella because the sun was tearing up. I probably have a nice shade on one side of my face from standing in the sun this morning. But God bless, I got everything done. I moved recently, so I had to get everything switched over, and I didn't have a choice, and I wanted to get it done. So I stood in that line about an hour yesterday to find out that I couldn't do half of the stuff that I needed to do, and I had to leave and came back. I drove back past that line. It was wrapped around the sidewalk. I went home. I was like, forget it. I'll do it tomorrow. So at least this morning when I went, I had a good day. I got everything finished, got everything changed over. Had to take that dreadful driver's license picture again this morning. And then I thought about, this is not the hair I wanted on my license for the next couple of years, but hey, it is what it is. But anyway, I hope that during this pandemic, everybody's been taking care of themselves, that if you have been walking or getting out and moving around, that you continue to do that. I've kind of been stunned a little bit. Had some illnesses the last couple of weeks, but it's time for me to get back out. The weather is perfect now. It's not too hot, not too cold, and I can get out and kind of make a couple of laps. If this is your first time watching, I skipped this whole part, y'all. But if this is your first time watching, this is the latest Sound Wonder Lowe, and I'm the host and creator of the show. We broadcast every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. right here on Facebook and on YouTube. So if you have not liked both of those pages or subscribed to them, please go and do that now. But make sure that you come right back to this live. My Facebook name is the Lady Sound Wonder Lowe, and it's the same for the YouTube also. Trying to build subscribers. I think I got 2. So y'all help me out. I need some subscribers on YouTube. So please flip over there. Look, I should get 3 tonight. Yes. I should get 3 at least tonight. So please flip over and go and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Things that are upcoming. I think last week I told you about I am working on a new podcast. So still working on that. Finally got my look. This is to show you I have a whole studio in my little office at home. Here's my mic. I'm waiting on my headphones to come so I can start doing my podcast. But when it's time for that, I will make another announcement. I'll do another little show and we'll talk about that. So tonight, this is the second event. Now, I know everybody else probably had other stuff to do, but we had a big event before this one where we listened to Senator Joyce Elliott and the Democratic Party of Pulaski County tonight. So I hope that you were able to tune in and get some good information from her. She's an excellent candidate. I've known Ms. Joyce for a long time, and she's helped us in some advocacy things. I worked with the Heart Association, some things some years ago. So please support her. She is who we need right now in that position. So please support her. She's also having a rally this Saturday, October 3rd in Benton. So if you're in the area, please come out. I think it's at Benton Riverside Park. Please come out 3 o'clock and join that rally also. So my show is the second in tonight's great lineup of online activities. Now, after this show, stick around because you can watch the first 2020 presidential debate. I don't know about y'all. I'm waiting. I'm ready to watch this. I'm ready to see what's going to happen. So make sure that you don't go to sleep after this, that you go in there, you tune in to watch the debate because, hey, only thing I can tell y'all vote like your life depends on it because it actually does. So make sure you tune in for that. That's going to start at 8 p.m. Central Time. Now, on to the show at hand. I have 3 awesome people that I've known for quite some years, all of y'all, and the work they do around the country. Look, I was giving y'all countrywide shout outs. The work that I'm speaking it. Let's put it like this: we're gonna speak countrywide. Y'all can go all over, but I know that you've done it in the community. We got. I call y'all offenders. Marty's a repeat offender. So Brian is my resident historian. Brian has been on my show, I think, probably more than, well, it's like you and one other person. Y'all have been here so many times, but Brian is my resident historian. Marty is a return offender. She's back again because I love to talk to you and hear what you think about just about any and everything. And the new person on the block is Robin Freeman. Robin's been doing some work in the community with some community forums she's been doing out of Benton that I cannot wait to hear more about. So tonight's show, we're actually focused on these three different things. And I said that because over the past couple of months, I've been reading your Facebook posts. And I love how you all always post something that's educational. Now, sometimes y'all get rowdy, which I like that too. I like a good fight, a good debate. But you post things that we need to be thinking about. Your posts are very thoughtful, they're very thought-provoking. So, Marty, I consider you are my language of color specialist, expert person, because you do some cultural sensitivity things and some other activities around town. Brian, again, like I said, is my cultural, historical guru about just about anything and everything African. So he's going to talk about the African diaspora. And then Ms. Robin down there is our race and equity expert because she's been in the community holding forums and talking to people about these very things. So tonight, welcome to the Ladies Lounge. I appreciate you all taking some time out your schedule tonight.
Thank you.
So I'm going to give you all a chance to just tell something about yourselves, introduce yourselves, and what they say in church. Come to us in your own way. Introduce yourself just a little bit. And let me just say this real quick. Anybody that's watching, if you have any comments or you have any questions for our panelists tonight, please go over into the comment section. I can say the word, y'all, section. And make sure you post your comments, and we'll be sure to get your our questions for you. So whoever wants to go first, go for it. Okay, then all y'all gonna be quiet.
That's never the issue. I was just giving somebody else a chance to go first.
All right. Come on, somebody else.
Okay, I'll go first. My name is Robin Freeman, and you said tell a little bit about myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
I am the director of the University of Arkansas Currents. We are a training and consultation unit located in Hot Springs, part of the UA system, UA Fayetteville campus. And part of what I've been doing in Benton is after the George Floyd incident killing, I wrote a letter to the editor in Benton and to our Saline Courier newspaper, and because I felt like something needed to be said. And the gist of my letter asked the question because so many of us are Christians, and my question that really resonated with me was, is it a sin to be silent? I mean, will I go to hell for not saying anything? And so out of that, I think that stirred up a lot of people. And we had a rally on the Saline County Courthouse lawn in early June. And Senator Elliott was our keynote speaker at that. A lot of people showed up. They want to do something. They want to see change happen. So it was a rally. You know, we marched, we prayed, we kneeled, we chanted. And something, as I heard her saying earlier in the show, you know, there's a voice inside of each of us. And I remember standing there after she was speaking. It was time to go. The rally time was over. And for me, it was like a voice inside of me was saying, there's something more. People want something more. We've got to do more. And so out of that, I started the Dialogues on Race as a way, and I call it Common Ground for Peace, Justice, Unity, as a way for people to come together to build an understanding about our experiences with race, racism, equity, inclusion, having a sense of belonging in the city of Benton. We love our city. It's a great place to live, but we just don't talk about race. And we need to get over that. We need to normalize the conversation about racism and make it something that's part of our everyday conversation. If we want to get over this hump and really be true Christians as we are called to be, then we've got to deal with this issue.
Amen. It goes right there.
Awesome, Robin. And I feel like I'll jump in so the gentleman can go last. Uh, I want to say thanks again, and well to my cousin, as I say on my Facebook side, Wonder Lowe. Thank you for inviting me back. And as you know, I post a lot of controversial commentary, a lot of subject matter. And it basically stems from a couple of places. One of them that has really been pushing me since I realized 2016 was the fact that I'm often in spaces where I'm the only person that looks like me. And I decided a long time ago that I have two options when I'm in these spaces. I can either sit quietly and not be seen or barely heard, or I can demand and take up space. And for those who know me, I chose the latter option, is to take up space. And so with that, I found it an opportunity to start pushing individuals in these spaces into cultural competency conversations back in 2016. And from that, I started doing a series of cultural competency workshops, starting with unconscious bias, going all the way through race, ethnicity, gender, colorism, intersectionality, and so forth. And so I've been doing these workshops since 2016. And during this pandemic, I decided to officially organize this as a standalone business called System Critical LLC. And so I have continued these conversations with private corporations. And I'm telling you that 8 minutes and 42 seconds was a game changer for a lot of companies. And I have had the pleasure of doing a series of trainings with teams, an entire employee basis on these various tough topics. You mentioned colorism, because you know I post periodically about our various relationship with colorism. I'm actually doing a presentation tomorrow on privilege. Yay. And within that, we're going to talk about white privilege, and we're going to hit on colorism, which is a major component of not only our racial complexities that we think of in terms of black and white, but actually inside of our own racial and ethnic groups as well. Colorism and the centering of whiteness and the proximity to whiteness have profound impacts on our culture, our psyche, and how we frame and move through this world. And a lot of that is very much based in our history. See how I'm queuing that up to you, Brian, to talk. It's so layered, and so it's just so much. But I thank you for the opportunity to be here again.
Thank you. Mr. Brian, from you.
I'm Brian. I'm a historian.
Oh no, you're not getting off that easy, bro.
No, of course, you know, I'm happy to be back with you and to discuss, you know, some of the things that I like to talk. I guess you could say I've been a bit provocative on Facebook over the last few weeks with some of the questions that I posed. One of the questions that got a lot of feedback was, you know, where are the churches in the fight today? And are churches still preaching the social justice part of Jesus's gospel? So, you know, those are some of the questions that I've been wrestling with lately, not just in a public forum, but internally I've been, you know, wrestling with these questions. But I think that a part of why we are where we are today is the fact that we don't recognize, we don't know our history, right? As Black people, as people of African descent, we don't know our history, and we don't recognize that we have brothers and sisters that are in other parts of the world, and we are not alone, and that we need to work on reconciling some of these relationships. So that's what I'm here to talk about. I have some thoughts on colorism, have some thoughts on social justice. So let's do it.
I knew you would. Thank you all, and I appreciate y'all taking some time. Now we're gonna do this and do it and get out of here on time, because we want to make sure we get to the next event on time. So, having said all of that, everybody gave the introductions, and you all hit on all of the things that we need to be talking about, and it's so much that, of course, we're not going to be able to do it in a little 45-minute rest of this show, but it gets the conversation started. So the first thing, let's just talk a little bit more about colorism and the language of color. We've had this conversation, I think, Marty, you and I, back and forth for quite a long time about growing up and people saying, I hate when somebody says you act white, or you're being proper, or you sound white. I heard somebody say that to somebody the other day, and it just got so far up under my skin, because what does that exactly mean? And then Brian, you know, it's going to be a historical thing, and Robin, there's going to be some racial justice in there for you to accompany. But start off talking about just the language of color.
I think our American experience has programmed us to center whiteness. First as a matter of survival, and now as a way to coexist and to pursue success through it using a certain framework. And what I mean by that is we have a lot of self-imposed racism, and it's not just us as Black folks. All of the lesser or more melanated people of the world have unfortunately also taken in this toxic mentality regarding the proximity to whiteness. So the closer your complexion is and your features are to that which are considered to be Eurocentric, the level of perceived benefit in being that close to whiteness exists. It has existed in a variety of different ways throughout history, and it plays out in a variety of different ways culturally. When I think of within our particular group, from a socially constructed perspective of being African American and or Black, I happen to be Black. We had our own tests, litmus tests. If you were lighter than a particular color, using whether it was a brown paper bag or other features, then you could be acceptable. And if you had hair texture of a certain type and you had certain features, then you got to be pretty or handsome, or you were the right person for certain activities, even including, as we looked at our activity in the civil rights movements and others, we had to find the right Black person in order to present. You and I have had a fabulous conversation about what's a dark-skinned girl, for example. And I grew up in a small town in Arkansas, and we had a very complicated color chart as it relates. We were not simplistic in our colorism goal. So in my particular family, we had two extremes. The very light, almost white individuals had a love-hate relationship with their skin tone. And then it had on the far end, the very, very dark, almost Black, literally almost Black complected relatives also had a love-hate relationship with their skin tone. So in my family, everybody was chasing the middle.
Yeah.
Right. So all of our dark complected relatives married as light of a Black skinned woman as they could, with their fingers crossed that they would produce children in the middle. So in my particular colorism experience, being in the middle was the ideal. You weren't too light for people to question whether you were Black, and you weren't too Black in which people would torment and tease you about your complexion. So it was considered to be like in the story of the porridge, just the right size bear or whatever that little story went. So we have a very complex, and we could go on for hours talking about how we ended up developing all of these complexities to our colorism spectrum. But it all comes from this centering whiteness and the benefits perceived with proximity to it.
Now, Brian and Robin, jump in and talk about you know, historically how that plays out, and then how that plays out in race and equity conversations today. Like she said, like Marty said, one of the conversations we had is I'm the light-skinned person in my family. Now I'm darker now than I was when I was younger, but we have a grandmother. She passed on, so I can talk about it now. But my grandmother was a dark brown woman. Now, if that makes sense, what dark brown is. But she, and I hope now some of my cousins are not offended by my saying this, but she did treat her lighter skinned grandkids different than she treated her darker skinned grandkids. And as a little kid, by me being one of the youngest ones, I didn't understand that. When I got a little bit older and I started understanding, I tell you what, right before she passed, because I was grown by then, I started getting it. Because I noticed that her darker skinned grandkids, when we were smaller, she really kind of pushed them away. And that was not right. It wasn't right at all. And then the lighter skinned so-called grandkids, she treated us a little bit differently. And we were the ones that she kind of held, you know, kept close to her. I went to visit her and I stayed with her or whatever. And they didn't ever feel comfortable enough to come around her because she made them feel uncomfortable. And the weird thing was she was darker than most of them. But that was just how she operated. And, you know, it took a long time for me as an adult to understand that even in our families, we have these layers. We have these, I have relatives, I have white relatives because I have a great great grandfather who's white. So I have white relatives. Okay, I don't care about that. I have some that could pass for white, so to speak. And then I have some that are on the whole other end of the spectrum that they got teased and called midnight. I don't think the beauty is any less with the color, whichever color you, or whichever end of it you ended up on. But we do have other people that are in our family that do treat certain folks differently. Now, if that's how you're being treated at home, and then you walk outside and you got to deal with the world treating you a different way, that just adds more stress to a person. So y'all jump in and talk about the historical and what it looks like today for me.
So historically, we see, as Marty said, the ideal that was held up to be beautiful was, you know, blonde-haired, blue-haired, blue-eyed, you know, white people, whether man or woman. And we've been programmed to accept that as the ideal standard of beauty from, you know, far back to even today it goes on. When you look at marketing campaigns, who is considered to be beautiful, it's always the person that's closest to that blonde hair and blue eye, right? And then, so since Black people come in a spectrum of colors, from, as you said, those who could pass for white to those who, like me, you could never, you know, even ever, you know, I'm dark skinned, I have curly hair, you know, we just come in a spectrum. And the interesting thing that I've always found looking at the historical record is that there were those who could pass who chose not to pass, who went out of their way to make sure that people knew that they were Black people. Homer Plessy comes to mind from Louisiana, you know, the famous segregation case of Plessy v. Ferguson. Homer Plessy could pass, but yet he got on that train car and made sure that the conductors knew he was a Black man so that the case would take off and we could challenge separate but equal. And so I think that, you know, just looking at it, it's an interesting concept and it's so filled with misinformation, right? The thing that always comes to mind is the Willie Lynch letter, which is just, you know, it's made up, right? The letter is made up, but yet you will find, I'd probably say 65, 70% of Black people think that it's a real thing. But it was a made up letter. But what it did was it played on existing divisions within the Black community that were there that dealt with color, because this isn't new and it's not unique to America. You look at South America and Brazil and other Afro-Latino cultures, it's even more pronounced there because people who are in power politically are the ones that are closest to white. The ones that have the most privilege and economic privilege are those that are closest to white. When you look at Brazilian culture and you see poor people, they always show poor Black people, right? Poor people who are dark-skinned Black people. And you see the ruling class, which are the blonde hair, blue eye, but they're still Latino. They still have African ancestry. It's just the fact that some genetic lottery that they hit, that they ended up being light skinned, light colored eyes, straight hair, and they use that to their advantage because the system is built that way.
Yeah.
I'd piggyback that Asians, South Asians, also engage in colorism on a scale that is something to behold as well. So even when we get out of our African diaspora, you see it. This bad socialization is truly worldwide. It really is.
And it's interesting. It's interesting in South Asia. Like the caste system. We think our system is rigid. Like their system is, you can't marry outside of your caste, or you're just kind of ostracized if you do. And as we get more into the African diaspora, those people are African descent too. But
everybody's of African descent.
That's true. But even more recently, a lot of people don't recognize that there have been two distinctly different slave trades in the history of Africa, and there was an early one that Arab slave traders raided Eastern and Central Africa and sent enslaved people to the Middle East and India, right? And so when you see these super dark-skinned Indians, those are people of African descent who ended up in India in the 7th and 8th centuries as part of an Arab slave trade, and they intermingled with native Indians, and they produced those people. So it's all a part of this African diaspora. But we'll get a little bit more into that.
Ms. Rodman, how do you relate to that for today?
I think that shows up in our conversations with both Black people and white people who, as Brian said earlier, we don't know our history. I think it's just a big of an issue among white people that they're buying into this caste system, this system that pits dark against lighter complected people, and giving more opportunities to those who look like them. And I think that that's an economic disparity that occurs for people who are darker complected, because in the classroom or in the employment, there's not as many opportunities, because if you don't look like me, we make assumptions about people who are darker complected. And that can affect our decision making, our desire to invite someone into the workplace, to hire them, or to even go to church with them. But yeah, I think that mentality not only exists among people of color, but also among white people. They don't actually realize it. And I think when we talk about knowing our history, that all of us need to know our histories and how that has impacted our perspective today, whether we're white or Black.
Absolutely. And even in sentencing, it has been shown, study after study, the more African your features and the darker your skin and the coilier of your hair, your sentencing tends to be harsher. You're normally seen as guilty more often, and your sentences tend to be upwards of 20% longer, just looking down this racial scale of how the judge or jury actually relates or responds to you. So the ability to demonize, through our history and culture, if you look through old imagery of how they would mock us and the way in which we would be described and drawn and depicted, the darker complected among us were normally demonized in ways that are just absolutely horrific to think of today. And so an unconscious bias, when people, you're getting all these images and data, and then you're not getting a complete history and perspective. And all of this comes together and plays out in what people do and how they react. And unfortunately, the color spectrum is problematic. And the only way to really get over it, one, is to learn more about our history. Bless you. And two, to do the internal work, whether we are Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, or the other, is to do the internal work as to why we continue to support this centering of whiteness as the standard. From an economic perspective, we kind of default and say, okay, and I question this often, like, why is it supposed to be 2 parents and 2.2 kids? I don't know what the 0.2 kid is. I don't know if the woman's always supposed to be pregnant or what. I don't know what the 0.2 is. But why is that the standard? All cultures don't operate that way as being the ideal family structure, right? But we demonize other groups if they don't model exactly these frames that have been designed without us being included in the design of those frameworks. So, it's a big, big, big deal.
I think that goes back to Brian's question earlier about the role of the church and how our Christian influence, morality, and how that has seeped into our culture in terms of how we see the ideal family. I think that has a lot to do what we call Christian values and why we see that 2.2, that husband and wife and those 2.2 kids and the dog and the cat as the ideal family. And usually that 2.2 kids and that family, that mom and dad are white, hardly or lighter complected people of color.
People who know me know that I tend to blame the Puritans for most of what ails us today, because they were pretty bad people. But I think Sister Freeman, I call her Sister Freeman because I know her from church. But I think that she hit on something like the idea of morality being based on the Judeo-Christian concept of morality has permeated all of American culture, and not just American culture, but Western culture as a whole. And we see that eliminating a lot of our traditional African culture is eliminated because it sometimes runs counter to what people view as traditional Christian culture. The idea of a lot of people not realizing that there are cultures in Africa that are polygamous, but it's based on a woman having multiple husbands, right? And so these are things that just run completely counter to what we have grown up accepting as what is traditionally right and wrong based on what the Bible teaches us. Even the idea of our traditional African religious traditions, right? Spiritualism and animism and viewing God as being alive in all aspects of nature. Like, if you say that to somebody here in America, they look at you like you're a voodoo queen or somebody, right? But if you think about it, that's not really contrary to Christianity, because we teach that God is present in all things, but yet the fact that you're looking at something that's traditionally African it's dark and it's viewed as being dark and ominous, and like, you know, Europeans used to refer to Africa as the dark continent. And so, like, you know, these things are just, like you said, Marty, they're just so ingrained in who we are as people living in America, that even when people like us start to say, well, you know, this is something that I'm starting to get into, your friends will look at you like, whoa, what's wrong with you? You know, and so I think as we need to start to shed that. But, you know, grandma ain't gonna let us get rid of it, you know. Grandma not gonna let us.
One of the I have to admit, because of where I grew up and the environment in which I grew up, and as I pointed out, we had a very complex colorism scale, but we also had a whole beauty scale thrown in there because, honey, we had harmful expressions like, that's good yellow on the waist. If the person cute with the yellow, because just because you were light complected didn't automatically give you a pass in my family. You also had features and hair, and everything had to come together because we had all kind of expressions to go with it. So most people talk about, oh, she's pretty for a dark-skinned girl, which, by the way, I never heard at all growing up. I heard that applied to me for the very first time in my 40s in Little Rock. And I did a step back, like, dark skin girl. Who the heck they calling a dark skin girl? I'm not a dark.
Did somebody call you dark skin?
Yeah.
Yes, I was blown by. I was referenced at a social event by someone else I did not know, but I had met, and they said, you know, the dark skinned girl over there. And they were talking to one of my friends that happened to be light skinned, and I was like, I'm looking around like, who are you looking? Who is she talking about? And I said, I guess she was talking about you. I was like, I'm a dark skin girl. I was like, since when? And someone else did that to me in Little Rock. And I said, wow, just see how different our colorism. I was so not a dark skinned girl. So I never had those labels. I never carried that baggage because it didn't apply to me. I had other friends and classmates and people in the neighborhood, and I felt bad for them. And I wouldn't call them all those horrible names, but I was like, well, that's not me, because that never happened to me. So it was a really out of body experience to have that applied to me here in this community. But one thing that really, really started to increase my desire to learn, because there was a deliberate protocol in which the histories of non-white individuals in this country was removed from history books, right? And telling his story, the version of United States of America and his story, our histories were stripped, right? We are really, really limited. And there was a time in which you were embarrassed and with this idea of being formerly enslaved, that your ancestors had been property and not considered to be human. So it was a whole section, because I remember when Roots came out, oh my goodness, that was controversial, and whether or not to see it, or, you know, because we had so much to get over just to see that, right?
Yeah.
So one turning point that helped me kind of intensify my journey actually connects to Mosaic Templars, where I believe that's where Brian is sitting right now, was the Kinsey collection, and having Bernard Kinsey talk about and then have artifacts that show we were here before 1619. Well before 1619, and free individuals, not enslaved. Yeah. And I'm not going to go down that whole Moors path, because I've had too many arguments with people over that Moors did not equal Black. It was far more complicated and involved in that. But I will say that the Kinsey collection was a really empowering moment for me, and encouraged me to intensify filling in the gaps of what I have been led to believe and what I know to be true.
Mm-hmm. Robin, let's jump into some of the talks that you've had in Benton. I am now a resident of Benton, so
how are you?
Yeah,
count me all in the house. Okay.
You know, I yell it when something is not right now. But let's talk about how all of that now relates to the conversations that you have around race and equity, because one of the things, and one thing I do want you to do is make clear what equity means, because I hear people say it and use it in different ways, and I think sometimes we go, equity means equality, and they get them mixed up. So kind of talk about what equity is, and then talk about how all of what we've been talking about relates to the conversations that you're having now.
Sure. We started the Dialogues on Race in June or July. We kind of did a practice session. I don't know if you've seen the Procter & Gamble videos, and one of them is The Look. And we started off with like a dry run, and we had panelists, including the mayor, different people of color in this panel. And we showed the video, and then we talked about our reactions to it. From there, we just built 3 dialogues around police, law enforcement in the community, equity in education. Mm-hmm. And then the last one was our beloved community, kind of building upon Dr. King's philosophy. So our goal, again, was to just build awareness and talk about where there are disparities in access to education, what needs to happen to improve relationships between law enforcement and the community, and why do we have this viewpoint that people of color need to just act right, and not that law enforcement, who are trained individuals and know how to de-escalate situations, and what their role is in building true relationships and building our community, building trust with people of color. Why people of color have a lack of trust for government institutions, and then for our community, what that means in terms of economic development, for housing, for the homeless, for people who are low income or in poverty. How does race relations impact person's ability to get ahead in society? Do they have equal access, or are they equipped with the tools and resources so that they can get ahead in our community? And why do we focus so much on just work hard and act nice and be good? You'll get ahead. And trying to dispel the myths about how we really succeed in our society, and just shedding a light on what we need to be doing as concerned citizens and as Christians, because those are not mutually exclusive things. To ensure that every person of color in our community know they belong here. The city of Benton has a motto: "You belong here." Do we belong here? So we want to make sure that we're having those conversations that people feel, whether they're Hispanic or Mexican or Black or Asian, that people really feel that they belong here in our community.
Me just jump back 1 second. While Marty was talking, I was thinking about 3 movies I just watched. Well, 2 movies and then 1 show. Old show, if anybody remembers, Different Strokes. Arnold and his brother.
Willis.
Yeah. Think about, there was an episode about a test that they took, and the test was basically, in their minds, culturally biased. Remember, he asked about what type of blues. And he named Rock Good Down Home and something else. It's blues, because that's what blues meant to him. The test implied what color blues. So it was, and I don't know why that always pops in my head when we start talking about, we have a conversation, anything around the language of color with us. The other 2 movies I just watched, I watched Bessie the other night, and I watched Just Mercy. I cried a little bit in both of them, because Just Mercy just it triggers so many different things in you. And one of the things that the guy that was in the cell beside Mr. Oh my God, I cannot remember the star's name. Jamie Foxx's character. He was played by Ice Cube's son. Y'all see I'm bad with names. Ice Cube's son's character, Mr. Hinton. He was Mr. Hinton in real life, I think. At the end of the movie, I'm that person that reads every single one of those little things that pops up. And it said that he was really basically arrested because the sheriff said he looked guilty.
Right. Yeah. I remember that.
You arrested somebody because they looked a certain way. And then the other one in Bessie, the color thing, she didn't let anybody in her show who was lighter than the brown paper bag. Because remember, she got kicked out of a show because she was darker than the bag. And all those things, I just think about all the movies and the shows over time that you watch that had something to do with colorism, and then we think about where this stuff comes from. We manifest a lot of it. We talk a lot of it. We have our little sayings about high yellow and all these little things we say, and we bring a lot of that stuff out of us because I just kind of think from slavery on down, we picked up a lot of hate messages about ourselves. And we are not happy with the texture of our hair. We're not happy with the complexion of our skin. I grew up in that era where people used to use this little whitening cream stuff. I cannot remember the name. Ambient something. And I noticed that all of the darker women that I knew put this stuff on their face. It smelled like old onions. But in their mind, it was going to make them a lighter complexion. And that was the goal. So I was thinking about all that when you were talking, and I'm going, we have so much historical baggage that we created in our families that when we walk out our doors in the day and during the day and go out into the world, you have to now deal with what the world sees you as also. You are not a dark-skinned girl. I'm not a light-skinned girl anymore. But in certain circles, I am the light-skinned girl. In certain circles, you might be the dark-skinned girl. Just depends on who's standing beside us at the time. So I've learned to kind of look over folks. I've heard the comments, "Oh, you're pretty for a big girl," because I am thick. Yeah, I'm thick. I just put it like that. But I've heard those little things too. And people say stuff, I think, sometimes out of an abundance of ignorance, not necessarily to be hurtful, but that's how they were taught. That's what was, said to them, so they just do that. Now, let me fast forward. Jump back into what Robin just said. Now, my stories have been, and I'm glad that you brought up what the motto is, you belong here. Growing up, I was told not to come here.
To Benton?
Not to come to Benton.
Yeah, Benton. It was kind of like downtown. Like I think the stories I always heard when I first came here about 27 years ago was when the people of color on the trains would pass through, they'd pull the shades down on the windows so that people would know that, Black people were on the train because the racism here was supposed to be so bad.
Yeah.
Well, the racial history of Central Arkansas is so complex. Benton, Bryant, everything basically west of 430 was created because of white flight.
It's true.
As Black people started to spread out of, eastern. Well, you have to go back further than that, right? So originally, there were lots of what we as historians call salt and pepper neighborhoods in Little Rock, where Black and white people lived in the same blocks, right? But as we approach, the turn of the century, the early 1900s, the 1920s, moving into that period, we start to see some stratification of race in communities. And then as we approach the 40s and the 50s, with the civil rights movement starts to take hold, the classical civil rights movement starts to take hold, you really see Black people being relegated to certain parts of the city. So you see with slum clearance, Black people being moved east, right, towards Granite Mountain, that area, and white people starting to move west. And then in 57, when the Central High crisis started, people don't realize that before integration, the plan was we're going to build a new high school in the eastern part of the city for the Black kids, which becomes Horace Mann. We're going to build a new high school in the west part for the white kids, which becomes Hall, right? And so you get this stratification of the city starting to happen. Well, when 57 happens and you see Black people starting to move into areas that they weren't necessarily designed to live in, once we started to overcome redlining and block busing and things like that, then you see white flight occurring with the addition of I-630. Now white people can move outside the city and they can still get to work in the city relatively quickly. So that's where you get the explosion of Benton and Bryant and everything west, Bauxite, and even going on out further west. And so Benton was one of those places where it was a white flight enclave. Black people just didn't live there. They weren't allowed to live there. And even as I was growing up in the 90s, we considered Benton to be, pretty much off limits. Yeah, there was some rural Benton where Black people lived, but, going downtown Benton, just didn't do it. Right. So it's interesting how now, as Black people move into Benton and Bryant, white people continue to move further west, like Haskell and, places like that. And so it's just interesting to see.
They're moving to Perrin now. Yeah, trying to get away. Perrin in rural Saline County.
Yeah.
So, talk about some of the conversations that you all have had when you've done the forums. What has come out of it? What are people saying now?
That we need to do more talking and getting to know one another. My biggest takeaway has been that we just don't spend enough time building relationships with people who don't look like us. So we need to spend more time talking with one another. There's a lot of requests from people to have some interactions among the churches. There have been some prayer events going on, and we are starting a small group. In fact, it's meeting tonight, and it's using the curriculum Be the Bridge. And it's based upon, it is a faith-based curriculum, but it addresses white supremacy, white privilege. There are two other things, white identity, and one other white, did I say white privilege? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's one other, but it addresses 4 areas of those areas that we talk about that we don't talk about enough in terms of white privilege, white identity, white supremacy, and helps us to come to terms with the things that we need to know about how to improve our relationships, how to build a community of racial healing, and really get into equity. My long-term goal would be for us to do some type of task force where our city really invests in some of these solutions that are coming out of these discussions and really do the hard work of making change. And I know that's a long-term, it's not going to happen overnight, but we need change, and we need the investment and the commitment of our leaders to be able to make that change happen.
I've always found it interesting that white people see that, or they feel that Black people need to do more explaining. White supremacy is not a Black problem.
It's not.
It's not our problem to solve. And I just find it interesting that white people think that the solution to a white problem is more Black people talking about a white problem.
Amen. 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 My whole thing is you got to educate yourself. If you're wanting to help break this, then they have a duty and a responsibility to do the work. And it is not our responsibility to do the work for them. Now, we can have some tough conversations because y'all know I must be me. We can have some tough conversations. And you can bounce some things off of me and I can share my experiences, but doing the real work, the internal work and educating themselves, that's their responsibility. It has to be on them. We have to navigate too much as it is, and we can't take on ownership of what they need to do.
Agreed. I 100% agree. And so I think part of what we're doing you're responsible for doing the reading, whether it's How to Be Anti-Racist or reading Robin DiAngelo's White Privilege or other articles. I mean, the onus is on the individual to teach themselves and to learn. So it's quite an investment of time and resources to go out and learn about our history, learn about why we are here at this place in time. And that's, we haven't had a huge number of people who say they want to do it because it is an investment. And then there's all that angst, there's all that guilt, there's all that shame that you have to deal with, and who wants to deal with that?
I find it.
Go ahead.
I find the interesting part of Robin DiAngelo's argument in white fragility is that white people see racism as good and bad, right? If I'm a good person, I can't be racist because racism is bad. And so they never can see that it's not about good and bad. It's about being racist versus anti-racist. And if you're benefiting from a racist system, then you're reaping the benefits of racism, even if you're not actively participating in racism. You're still reaping the benefits of racism, which is still a problem.
Sure.
Yes, so I call it big R racism and little R racism. And when I mentioned that last week on my course on race and ethnicity, I cannot tell you the number of white people when I explain the difference. They were like, well, okay, I understand that the little R racism feels better, but can we come up with another word for that? And if we could come up with a replacement word for that, I think we could really make great strides in this country. And I said, unfortunately, it's still racism. I don't know how to help you. All I'm telling you is that the capital letter R is your KKK and white supremacist group that y'all automatically equate to as bad. However, the microaggressions that I have to deal with from y'all every day is little R racism. Sorry, still exists. Yeah. But you're right in separating this good and bad narrative, which, you know, Robin DiAngelo and Kendi are both considered to be quite controversial in this space as we talk about all things race, depending upon what framework you use. They both have very valid points, and it's tough. I want to go back to something really quick, the Wonder that you mentioned. You would kind of hit on equity. Currently, I can't tell you how many panels I have served on and how many formats talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are three different things. And I try to give this kind of visual representation. If you think of a circle or you're being in a room, if I'm invited into the room, you can say, aha, that's diversity, right? I'm just in the room. I may not have a voice. I may not have anything else, but hey, check me off on a list. I'm in the room. Equity said I got a seat at the table, right? Okay, so I've gone from just being in the room, I'm now at the table, but inclusion says my voice is honored, represented, acknowledged, and heard, and it's part of the actual conversation. Because you can be at a table and people can hand you a whole bunch of stuff, but you not really be included in what's going on. So I kind of use that in setting a room, because we all go into these various environments and settings, and that's kind of one of the visual representations I use. I think of that Charlie Brown picture with Franklin, who, if you really look at Franklin, he's just Charlie Brown colored in with a brown marker. He's exactly Charlie Brown if you take the brown color off for Franklin.
That's it.
I mean, you're like, hey, wait a minute. If you see that table where they're seated to eat, and he's the only person on the one side of the table, and all the rest of the white kids are crowding the other.
Yeah.
That's not really inclusion, is it?
No.
So equity basically says you get the things that you need. Inclusion, you actually get incorporated into the actual conversation, into designing the structure. Your voice is validated, it's appreciated. All of the others, we're still working, we're work in progress at all times.
All right.
I know we're running short on time.
We're down to about a minute, 2 minutes and a half or so.
Yeah, I know we're running short on time, but one of the internal debates that are going on within the Black community, and I know I've read some of Marty's Facebook posts on this, is can Black people be racist? So that's one of those internal debates that's happening within the Black community. I personally feel that because racism requires the power to influence somebody's life, that we can't be racist, but you know, I also acknowledge that I may be in a minority in that view.
Okay. Really quick, y'all. We got we're under our 59. About under a minute. Presidential debate is coming up. What are your thoughts on what you think or what you hope to see tonight?
I'm hoping to survive without my blood pressure going up. Because if my blood pressure goes up, I'm turning off and watching Lovecraft Country. I'm just gonna be real.
Oh my God, Lovecraft Country is so good. Yeah,
I'm saying.
something that is reality based and makes sense, that speaks to me, that helps me, just common sense stuff.
I don't think it matters what's said tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it really matters.
You know,
People are where they are, and I don't think there's anything that Joe Biden could say to sway Trump supporters. And I don't think there's anything that Trump could say to sway Joe Biden supporters.
I think you're right.
I think that we are so polarized at this point, and we are where we are. I don't even know what's the point of having a debate at this point.
Yeah.
I think it's just a formality, something that we always do.
I think I'm sorry. I'm with you on this one, Marty. As long as my blood pressure doesn't go up and it doesn't get just really outside of crazy, then I'll watch as long as I can stand it. But if it starts going off the deep end, I got to change the channel. I've limited my amount of news I take in now because it's just too much. And to watch two people go at it tonight, if it's not going to make any difference, then I don't want to listen to that. So, but anyway, we are at the end of our time. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate y'all coming on tonight. We have to have this conversation again because we know we're nowhere near finished because we went down a couple rabbit holes, which I enjoy rabbit holes. So I'll let you go. But we'll have to come back and we'll do this again. Thanks again. I appreciate you all. If you haven't liked my page yet, please go to the Facebook page and like it. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And just know that every Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, right here on Facebook Live and on YouTube Live, you're going to watch the latest on Wonder Lowe. So I'm the host and creator. I appreciate you all watching and tuning in this week. Stay tuned. We'll be back next week. Thank you guys again. Y'all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.